Hey guys, welcome back to the another episode of the Let's Solve Tactics series. So last time I had left off, I had reached around I think 1000 rating. Yeah, 1010. So let's keep going. Okay, so as usual, if you would like to pause your video to think, go ahead. You can do so now. It's black to play. White has just moved the rook to e4. Okay, so first thing I notice is White's rook on a2 is hanging out here. Uh, this one. So, but the queen is attacked, so taking the rook directly does not work. So if we can move the queen, let's say to d6 with check, that should buy me enough time to then take his rook next. So queen d6 check is my first candidate. Any other candidate moves? I don't see much else aggressive we could do. We could take on f2, but at a minimum, there he can just take my rook with his rook, and uh, I'm not in a position to take back because my queen would be hanging. So uh, that doesn't seem to work. So queen d6 check looks really straightforward. So let's see, how does he respond to the check? He can block with the queen or rook on f4. uh, if he blocks with the queen, I can simply capture. If he blocks with the rook, I could even consider g5 at some point, but I can simply take the rook on a2. If he blocks on g3, I can again trade queens, followed by taking on a2. If he goes to the back rank, so g1 or h1, then I think I could actually play rook to b1 check, and he would be forced to interpose with his rook and queen, and that will end up in checkmate. So that looks good. Okay, so he interposes with the queen. Since our own queen is hanging, we need to spend one more move to take his queen with check. And finally, we capture his rook. Okay, we got 9 points. Let's keep going. Okay, so black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. Okay, so I notice the pressure of the two rooks on this b2 point. Uh, did I just mess up something? No? Okay. Yeah, I noticed the pressure on b2, and it's possible to capture with either rook, but I think capturing with the f rook would be correct because I see that we can checkmate the white king. So rook on f takes b2 check, king goes to a1, we check him on b1, so rook to b1 check, king comes to a2, and then the other rook, the b8 rook, joins in on b2 for a checkmate. Since all these moves are happening with checks, we need not calculate anything else. Okay, let's go to the next one. Black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. White has just captured, I think it was a pawn on h6. Okay. Uh, so first thing I notice is this possibility of the check on g1. What else? The rook on h6 and r is hanging. Uh, the king is quite short of squares, so the king on e1 really has only one square available to go to, which is f1. So what are my candidates? Queen to b4 check, queen to g1 check. Hmm. If none of those work, even king to g7 could be considered, protecting my g6 pawn and attacking his rook, but I don't think a slow move like that would be an answer. So we should always start with examining our most forcing moves. So let's look at queen to g1 check. Because as I pointed out, the king doesn't have too many squares. So he has to block with the queen on f1. There we could check him again on e3, and that is, if you notice, a fork between his king on e1 and the hanging rook on h6. And after either when the king moves or he blocks with his queen, I'll be able to win the rook. Is there anything better than that after queen f1? My own queen is hanging on g1, so that has to be addressed. I don't see anything better. Also, after queen e3 check, I realized that queen to e2 would be forced. There is no other move black can make, so then we can safely capture the rook on h6, which is hanging. Check, check, and yeah. So if he had played queen to e2, which is I think the only way to get out of check, we would have captured the rook on h6. Notice that the rook on c1 is protected, so that will not be a good idea to capture. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, next one, black to play. White has just captured a pawn on b7 with his knight. Go ahead if you would like to pause. So first thing I notice is, of course, my queen is hanging. Also, there is this alignment possibly. Oops. I want to be careful that I'm not actually. Here we go. This is what I wanted to do. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, there is this alignment, of the bishop and the pawn and the rook and the queen, king behind it. Might be interesting. The knight itself, of course, our queen hanging is the main concern. What else? Yeah, nothing else really. So, given that I speak about the alignment, queen takes d4 is one candidate. I don't think we'll be able to trap his knight here because the knight has the c5 square available. So something like queen to, let's say, hmm, even something like queen to c8 or queen to d7 can always be met by knight c5. And if we capture with the bishop, he can capture with either the bishop or the pawn. And white is fine. So queen takes d4, and we are threatening queen takes f2, winning his rook, and the rook is not able to move because of the pin. If he captures our bishop, we take back on d4 with the bishop, and the rook remains pinned and will be won. After queen takes d4, what other moves does he have? His rook is hanging, so he has to do something about that. If he just protects the rook in some way, let's say queen f1, what do we do there? I could just pile up on the rook with rook to f6, and notice he is not able to again capture on f6 because of the pin. And I don't think he actually, yeah, he could defend it again, but uh, with bishop to e1. So queen to d4. So what I'm looking at is queen to d4, queen takes d4, uh, queen f1. Now rook f6. Oops, rook f6. Uh, bishop e1 to protect his rook further. It's not super clear. I think I may be getting some move order wrong, but I'm pretty certain about the first move, queen takes d4, so I'm going to go ahead and play it. Okay, so far so good, and he's giving us the easier option. Okay, so now we have a choice between capturing his bishop and capturing his rook. If we capture the bishop, it's an equal trade of 3 points for 3 points, our bishop for his bishop. So if we capture the rook, we at least get his, we win the exchange. We get his rook for the bishop, so I think that has to be correct. Okay. Hmm. I will take a moment to analyze this and see uh, how I was supposed to continue after, let's say, queen to f1. So queen takes d4. Uh, queen to f1 is not given as the one of the top moves, so there must be something simple I missed. Let's see. Okay, so rook f6 is correct, which was planned. The computer says rook f6. Now, bishop e1 is the last move, but knight c5, blocking this diagonal is possible. Okay, let's say bishop e1. Now, simply rook e8. Basically, white is totally tied up, and eventually we will win material. Uh, yeah. So if white just bites time with something like rook b1, he says, yeah, we can remove the guard on f2. Let's say he takes. Now we can take here, and we are winning because capturing will lead to mate. Okay, good enough. Okay, let's continue with the tactics. So, okay, go ahead and pause if you would like. Black to play. White has just pushed his pawn to f4. Okay, so the first thing we notice is the unfortunate position of this queen on a5. It is extremely short of squares. In fact, I think if it was the queen's move, I don't think it has any safe squares. So b4 and a3 are covered by my bishop on f8. So, oops. Yeah, so bishop on f8 covers the b4 and a3 squares, and all other squares are also covered. So trapping the queen in some way becomes one of the main goals. But let's see what other ideas are present. The king looks pretty safe. Even black is lacking development, so the bishop on f8 and the knight on b8 have not been developed. So seems like it is uh, still in the opening early middle game stage. But anyway, so in terms of candidate moves, knight to c6 comes to mind, hitting the queen. What else? This rook on a7 really I don't think can do anything. Pawn to d4 is another forcing move, a threat, attacking his knight. Queen takes h3 doesn't make sense. There are no checks. Okay, so given those choices, I think we should start looking at knight to c6, attacking his queen, and he has to move it. And where does he move it? He doesn't have to move it. He may have other moves, but if he had to move the queen, what would he do? After knight to c6, I don't see he has any good moves, so he probably has to give up some material or complicate the situation in some way. Uh, I don't see a way for him to attack my queen either. So knight takes b5. I can, yeah, knight takes b5 probably could be tried. But in that case, if I take his queen with the knight, he takes my rook. And after a move like pawn to c5, his knight on a7 would be trapped. Knight to c6, knight takes b5. If I take his pawn on b5, sorry, the knight on b5 with my pawn, uh, then his queen finds an escape square on c3, and it can retreat to b2. So we are uh, losing the, we are not able to trap the queen there. But we win a knight for a pawn. I think winning the queen is better, so I'm going to go ahead and play knight c6. Okay, as discussed, he tries to complicate matters. Now, I was planning on knight takes queen. Let's consider other choices. Moving my rook to b7 will not work. He'll just take on a6 with the queen, and his queen finds a safe haven. Uh, Also, by putting the knight on b5, at this very moment, he has the a4 square available for his queen. So if I take on b5, he can always take with his queen on b5 too. So that doesn't seem right. I should take the queen. And we got 5 points. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, white to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. Black has just moved his queen to f6. Okay. So first thing I notice is this alignment of the white queen with the black king with the bishop in the middle. So if there'll be always discoveries. So bishop g8 is the first candidate, and I'm just going to look at it because looks like king takes g8 is forced, and then queen to h7 is checkmate. I don't think I'm missing anything. Yeah, yeah, okay. Okay, let's keep going. Black to play. White has just moved his bishop to c4. Go ahead if you would like to pause. So our rook is attacked, of course, and uh, I think rook to c3, a rook fork between the queen and the bishop looks good. Any other moves? Nothing with the king. King. I don't think queen to g3 check leads to anything. He just captures our queen. We don't. I don't think we'll have a good follow up there. Taking on e3, he can again just trade queens with queen takes e3. That doesn't seem to be promising. Rook to c3, attacking his queen. What can he do? Notice that pinning my rook will not be helping. So a move like queen a1 doesn't help because I can simply take the bishop because my queen is protected. So he probably takes on f7, at least getting a pawn. No, sorry, he cannot do that. If he does that, I take his queen. Yeah, so looks like I'm winning the bishop after this. So, okay, queen b2, he tries the pin idea, but I can take his bishop. And my queen is protected, so we recapture. Okay. Okay, black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. White has just moved his rook to a1. Okay, an end game. I noticed that one of these pawns could be passed, could become passed. So basically, if I play, let's say, pawn to a3, and if he were to capture with the a pawn, the c pawn then becomes passed. Same with playing c3, and if he captures, the a pawn is passed. So that's the first thing I notice. Also, I noticed that there is this alignment of the two bishops. So pawn to c3 is a tempo move, meaning it's a forcing move. I'm attacking his bishop, so he has to do something about that. So other than that, with the rook, I don't see any great forcing moves. Playing h5 or g5 doesn't seem to make too much sense either. Uh, and a3 can always be met by rook takes a3, spoiling all fun. So c3 becomes really the only candidate I look at right now. So pawn to c3. Now what happens if he takes my bishop is the first question. I'm giving up a bishop. Now I have to capture on b2. So I get a pawn, a passed pawn. Now I'm threatening to promote while capturing his rook, so his rook must move. It could go wherever it wants actually on the first rank. So if he leaves the first rank and comes to a3 or a2, I will be able to promote. So something like rook to b1 or rook to d1, e1. Uh, so let's say rook to b1, attacking my pawn. So c3. So we're looking at c3. Bishop captures bishop. We take his pawn on b2. He goes rook b1. Now I have the other pawn that is left, so I can push a3, and I'm threatening a2. And a2, once I hit, come to a2, I'll be threatening his rook, and also my a3 pawn protects the b2 pawn, so he's not able to capture. And if I play a2, hit his rook, if he takes on b2, I can always promote. And this variation will also work if the rook was, let's say, on e1 instead of b1, because when I play a2, I can always promote, either the A or B pawns, and him capturing will not help because the other pawn will recapture. And I think he his bishop is not able to contribute because uh, he is not able to stop the advance of my A pawn because the C4 square. He would like to play bishop C4 and stop pawn to A2, but the C4 square is controlled by my king on D5. So I don't know if I can remove these arrows. Oops. Oh, okay, good. So pawn to c3, bishop takes bishop, pawn takes pawn on b2. Now, if rook takes a4, I just queen, and that should be good. He doesn't have any immediate checks that are dangerous. Maybe he has bishop c4 check, but I could come back to d6, and if he checks me, I can travel on the dark squares, and I should be okay. So c3, bishop takes bishop, c takes b2, Let's say rook to e1, pawn to a3, threatening pawn to a2. Yeah, I think next I'll be playing a2, so I should be winning there. Okay, so he doesn't go into that. He lets me capture his bishop, which I will. Okay, let's keep going. White to play. Black has just moved his king to e or f3. Okay, so a queen endgame where I have an extra pawn, but that pawn is currently being attacked, the pawn on f4, by his king and queen. Hmm. So one idea to be considered, not sure if it's good, is just simplifying into a pawn endgame with queen to d6 check. That by force gets into a pawn endgame. So queen takes queen, c takes d6, king takes d6. But with the pawn endgame where uh, I have given up my extra pawn and his king is more active than mine, I don't see why I will be better. So I can reject that. I could always take his pawn on a7, and if he takes on c5, sorry, I said that f4, it's actually c5. Yeah, this pawn. Okay, yeah, queen takes a7, queen takes c5. Now, if I recapture, I think I'm losing the c4 pawn afterwards, and that pawn in game has to be bad for me. Again, because of his active king. So definitely not easy, this one. Not very clear what I'm supposed to do. Okay, so let's see. So queen to c8 check, queen to c8 check. His king cannot move anywhere, so he has to block with the queen. So queen to c7. There, I could try queen to e6 check or queen to e8 check. Queen to e6 check, king takes c5 is possible. But if king takes c5, I have queen to d5 check. Is that? Let's see. Okay, and he goes to b6. There I have queen to b5 checkmate. So what I was looking at is queen c8 check. He has to block. I play my queen to e6 check. Now he cannot block with the queen, and his king is forced to take my pawn on c5. That is the only move that's available. Blocking with the queen, I can just take, and I'll be winning. So he takes my pawn on c5. I check him with the queen on d5. Again, he has only one move, which is to go to b6. And I check him again with the queen on b5, which is checkmate because of his queen being on c7, stopping him from going down the board or up the board, however you want to see it. Okay, so queen c8, check, check, and mate. Okay, a little bit of a challenging checkmate there. I think as we are going up in rating, the problems will get challenging. So let's see. Okay, black to play. White has just moved his rook to b7. Go ahead if you would like to pause. Okay, so I noticed this idea queen to e1 check, where he's forced to block with his queen, queen to f1 check. But there I have knight to e2 check. So queen e1, queen f1, knight to e2 check. And he is not able to capture because of the pin, so he must separate his king from his queen. So his king has to go to h1, and I will capture his queen on f1 with a checkmate. So queen e1, knight e2. and mate. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, white to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause again. So what I notice is this king is very restricted, and we have a lot of forces around his king. These two rooks, the queen is has an influence on his king position, and we can open this a file, by force by capturing on b6 with check. So that I think we should be playing with ideas to checkmate or threaten his king in some way. So let's look at that as the first candidate. Any other candidate moves right away? Rook takes b6. I don't think it leads to much. Like I give up the rook, and it's essentially the same position on the a file. So queen moves. Queen b7 or a8 will just be captured, and moving the queen back is too slow, I think. So a takes b6 has to be calculated. So a takes b6 check. Now he could either move his king or recapture. Capturing with the queen, I can happily just take his queen because I think the material starting out, I am behind by a bishop. Uh, so a takes b6. If he moves his king to, let's say, b8, then I could. Uh, there may be multiple options there, but I could take on c7 check, and there if he takes with his king, so king takes c7, then queen to b7 is checkmate, and after b takes c7 check, if he doesn't capture and goes to, let's say, c8, then we can make him capture, I believe, or can we? Uh, hmm. Actually, I'm gonna revert back and switch to the principal variation, which is pawn captures pawn, his pawn captures my pawn, and let's see what happens there because that looks like the most likely candidate. If he responds to pawn captures pawn with moving the king, then we already are doing pretty well because we will have a choice to capture on c7 or take on a6 with a mate threat, and yeah, we can think about that concrete position when it arises because that does not look like black's best chance. So let's look at pawn takes pawn and c7 takes b6. Okay, so here I notice rook takes a6 check, so a rook sacrifice. Now if he goes back to b8, I can checkmate him on a8 with either the rook or the queen. Is that right? No, that is not right because he will be able to come up. Okay, so let's look at that. So a b6, c b6, rook takes a6 check, king to b8. Now let's say rook a8, king to c7, uh, rook a7 check. If let's say king to c8, then I have queen b7 with mate. So now if a takes b6, a takes c takes b6 check, rook a6 check, rook takes pawn check. That is, if he captures my rook, I go rook to a1 check, and that is checkmate because he is not able to get off the a6 square. The b7 square is covered by my queen, and the b5 square is covered by my pawn on c4. So let's take. Now I think it is this sacrifice, and this is checkmate. Okay, okay. Took quite a bit of time on that one, and yeah, I don't think I was solving very confidently there, but that's okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's go to the next one. White to play. Black has just moved his queen back to a8. So first thing to notice is I have this advanced pass c pawn. Second thing is I am way behind in material. I think I'm two pieces down. So black has an extra knight and bishop. So if I don't make very good use of this fast pawn, then I'll be lost because there is no checkmating chances. His king is very, very secure. Uh, so to make good use of this fast pawn, what are my candidates? Promoting immediately could be considered, but he could simply take on c8 with his queen, let's say, or the rook for that matter. And I have given up a pawn, my passed pawn, and I don't see what's my follow-up. So queen takes queen is a candidate. So he has to recapture with his rook. Now there is this common idea, rook to b8 check, forking his king and rook. Now if the king moves, I take his rook, and I have won a whole rook. But if he captures on b8, I'll be able to promote by capturing his rook on b8. So queen takes queen, rook to b8 check, and we take his rook and promote. Okay, so we have hit 1100, but let's keep going. Okay, white to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. Okay, so what do I notice? Hanging rook on a2, hanging bishop on g3, which we can immediately capture. Uh, some lot of attention on e6. So we have the knight, the rook, the queen, all trained on this e6 square. Yeah. So let's see. Material wise, it's I think we are up by a pawn. Okay. Yeah. Uh, Candidate moves. Capturing the bishop, of course, is a candidate. So if I capture the bishop, what happens? Let's say queen takes g3. Is he threatening a mate? He's threatening a mate on f2 there. Okay. That could be the answer. I'll remove the colors and think. Uh, I'm just going to click somewhere else. Okay, that's fine. Let's see. So take his bishop. He takes with the queen. He's threatening queen f2. What are the different moves I can try to defend? Rook e2 is possible, but then that allows him to check me on the back rank, which actually uh, leads to mate because I'll have to block with my rook and he'll be able to capture on e1 with his rook or queen, and that is checkmate. So rook e2 doesn't work. So fg3, queen g3, queen f3, that's possible. We are hitting his queen. Queen f2 is prevented against. Queen g2 is anyway not a threat because my queen defends that as well. If he tries a move like queen h2, planning to go queen h1, we could hmm, we could consider maybe moving our g pawn. But so pawn to g4 could be considered. Basically, using my queen on f3 to guard the h1 square looks a little risky, but maybe I'm holding. And if I manage to win this piece without getting checkmated, then I'm doing very well. Let's look at other moves. I'll come back to this. Maybe this is the main move, but just want to make sure I'm not spending too much time on one move when there may be others. So what about knight takes e6? Well, at least he has rook takes f2 check. So knight takes e6. If he had captured, I would have queen takes e6 check, forking his king and rook, and that'll be great. I'll win the rook. But after knight takes e6, he has rook takes f2 check, forcing king to g1. and yeah, then he can take my knight, and I take with his my pawn, sorry, my queen. He moves his king, and not sure what I've gained. I've given up a knight for two pawns, but he has gotten an important pawn, and his position looks very threatening. So, other than that, rook takes e6. I think same thing. So he's threatening queen, rook takes f2 or bishop takes f2. He's threatening to take on f2, and I need to do something about that. Queen to f3 directly could be played, of course, but again, then rook takes f2 check, and I have to give up my queen for his rook and bishop. So taking the bishop looks like the main move. So f takes g3, queen takes g3. Now, what are my candidates to stop the mate on f2? I could block the rook on the uh, second rank with the bishop, let's say. So bishop e2 is possible. Uh, Actually, just looking to see if I can do something on the back rank. So fg3, queen g3, queen c8 check, king h7, bishop d3 check, pawn to g6. I don't see a clear follow-up there. Maybe there is, but we'll come back to that, I guess. So yeah, so fg3, queen g3. Now we are trying to stop the mate on f2. I could go knight e2 or bishop e2. Let's say bishop e2. Would that work or no? He can always try to go to h1, but is there a threat there? Not sure. I don't feel like I have the solution for this one yet. Hmm. Okay, this one seems tricky. I think taking the bishop is correct because that gives me a piece. So I have already gotten something. Now I just need to get out of trouble after that, and I need to find the best way, the cleanest way to do that. Uh, but there are so many options. Uh, Not sure why bishop e2 will not work. I don't think rook takes e2 leads to anything. I can take back with the knight, for example. Queen f4 check is possible in that position after bishop e2. Yeah. So queen f4 check, I can always bring my queen back and block on f3. But what about queen h2 instead of queen f4 check? Does that threaten anything? If he goes to h1, I can always go up. Knight e4 is never threatened. Knight g4 is not a threat. My h3 pawn covers it. Hmm. I think I'm going to take on g3 and c because I feel like that's the right move. Okay, just doesn't make me continue, which is very, very strange. I have to analyze this because I spent a long time looking at this. Maybe there is no one best way. That may be the answer, but let's see. Okay, we spent 8 minutes on that, and clearly taking on g3 is correct. So that makes sense. We win the bishop. Now he's threatening this mate, and what is the best way to get out of that? So it turns out there are many ways. Knight to e2 is fine. The computer says queen to f3, as we were discussing, is fine. And if he went to h2, I was planning g4, which I think is satisfactory. Yeah, covering the h1 square. Um, Bishop e2. Is there anything wrong with bishop e2? Wow, it says black is drawing with knight d5. Not clear to me why. Uh, what if? Yeah, I'm not sure. What if I just move my king? Then he takes on e1. Okay, makes sense. What if I just? Hmm. I guess the problem is it's my move, and I have to find a decent move. And he's threatening c3. I don't know if that matters. Rook to c1, queen f4 check. I just want to see his threat. Uh, Take. Okay. So moving the rook to c1 doesn't work. What about rook to d1? Is there a problem? Knight to e3 check. Okay. So he has tactics with this very active knight on d5. Maybe wherever I go. What about rook to b1? This seems like it's close to a draw. His best move is king to h8. Okay. So yeah, queen f3 was good. Bishop to e2 wouldn't have been good, but even knight to e2 was good. So sorry guys, I digressed there, but I think we need to be critical and see why, just to verify our thoughts. Make sure what we were thinking was along the right lines. And I think I did okay. Okay, let's continue. Black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. White has just captured our pawn on c5. Okay. Mm. So I think this one we have to avoid recapturing, and we can fork his king and rook by playing pawn to d4 check. And then no matter how he responds, wherever his king goes, we can take on c3. That has to be the answer. Okay, very nice. Let's continue. Okay, black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. White has just moved his knight from f7 to e5. So first thing I notice is this pressure on f2. So the queen and bishop both lined up. So queen takes f2 comes to mind. He has to go to h1, and then I can checkmate him on g1. Okay, that's clean. Let's continue. Black to play. Go ahead again if you would like to pause. I notice that we have a very nice bishop lined up against his king position. Queen to e1 suggests itself because that will be a double attack on his king, the f2 pawn, a triple attack actually. King, the f2 pawn, and his hanging bishop on c1. So he has to play king to g2, and I don't think we should go after the bishop. Go after checkmate if possible. So queen takes f2 check will force his king to move again, and if he goes to h1, we checkmate him on g1 or f1, and if he goes to h3, then queen to f1 is checkmate. Yeah, so check, check, and just double checking. Yeah, okay, good. So important lesson, don't take the bishop when you have checkmate. Okay, white to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. First thing to notice is we are down a rook. Second thing is there is a lot of pressure from our pieces around his king position. So rook takes g6, sacrifice suggests itself. At a minimum, we will have a draw after that, a perpetual check. So rook takes g6, check. If he goes to the h file, then I'm guessing bad things will happen, but let's see. So if he goes to h8, then I have queen f6 check, followed by a checkmate on g7. If he goes to h7, then I can at least, at the minimum, use the discovery. So go rook to g2 check, where the queen will be hitting his king, and we can take his queen. That will be at a minimum what we can do. We can probably do more than that. So he has to take on g6, and we take back with the queen. He goes to h8, and since our knight is pinned, I am certain that we should be okay with the draw there. So we just shuffle between h6 check and g6 check. So keep checking the king on g6 and h6 till the cows come home. I think that will be the answer. Let's quickly see if there is anything better actually before I draw that conclusion. Maybe I'm just noticing maybe there is something better. So queen to f6 is very interesting, threatening a mate on h8. And how does he defend? He doesn't have good checks of his own, I don't think. Knight takes d4 or knight to b4 could be considered. Knight takes d4 check. I can take back with the pawn. After that, he is running out of good checks. Taking on d2 doesn't help. The c4 square is covered. And so queen to f6. And there is no direct way to control the h8 square. If he goes queen to h2, we can checkmate him on h8 using my queen. So that looks correct. Queen to e5, I can take his queen. Or actually, I can just play rook to h8. So queen to f6 looks winning. Okay, he takes, I take. And he sacrifices his queen. Okay, so I almost got that wrong, if you noticed. At first, I went with the first move that came to mind, which is rook captures g6, but there was something much better, and yeah, showing some restraint helped. Okay, white to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. Black has just moved the rook from b7 to a7. So I notice this is the knight fork pattern. I take his rook on a7, he captures back, knight to c6 check, followed by capturing his rook, and I'm up a knight. It should be a winning endgame. I don't think knight to c6 first is necessarily better. This looks cleaner, so I can do this. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, white to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. Black has just captured the pawn on g2. So the first thing to notice is the queen is pretty deep in our position and is very short of squares. In fact, I don't think the queen has anywhere safe to go. He can capture stuff like, pawns or a rook. Actually, taking the rook is safe. But so trying to trap the queen, rook h2 comes to mind. Rook h2, keeping the rook g1 will not work because he can take on h3 and then retreat along the h3 c8 diagonal. So rook h2, and the g1 square is covered by our knight. If he takes our rook, we can take back, which probably is his best bet. There are no other forcing moves black can throw at us. Every other square, g4 is covered, f4 is covered, g5 is protected by the knight, so rook h2 wins. Okay. Okay, let's keep going. Go ahead if you would like to pause. It's white to play. Black has just moved their queen to f6. Okay, so if we look at the material, it's roughly equal, I guess. Maybe it is completely equal. Yeah, it is actually completely equal. Okay, so but I see that our b pawn is hitting his knight. So, but he has attacked our queen. So taking his knight right now would be a mistake because he'll just capture our queen. So the first idea is taking his queen, making him recapture with the knight, and then we take a free knight on c6. Checking to see if there is anything else. I don't see there are other forcing moves because our pieces are all, you know, really not, in attacking positions. So I'm going to go with that, I believe. Yeah. and we win the free knight. Okay, and we have reached 1200, exactly 1200. And with that, I will stop this video. Hopefully, you enjoyed my, struggles against the tactics. And yeah, I will see you again in the next video. Bye, guys.